If before the beginning, in the writing at least, was a typewriter, a dog and a snake, the beginning itself, 11 years previously, was a murderer, a mule, and clay. Even in beginnings though, someone needs to go first, and on that day, it could only be the murderer. After all, he was the one who got everything moving forward and all of us looking back. He did it by arriving. He arrived at 6 o'clock. As it was quite appropriate too. Another blistering February evening. The day had cooked the concrete, the sun still high and aching. It was heat to be held and depended on, or really, that had hold of him. In the history of all murderers everywhere, this was surely the most pathetic. At 5'10", he was average height, at 75 kilos and normal weight. But make no mistake, he was a wasteland in a suit. He was bent-postured, he was broken. He leaned at the air as if waiting for it to finish him off, only it wouldn't. Not today, for this, fairly suddenly, didn't feel like a time for murderers to be getting favours. No, today he could sense it, he could smell it. He was immortal. Which pretty much summed things up. Trust the murderer to be unkillable. At the one moment he was better off dead.
Welcome to the Good Reading Magazine podcast, sponsored by Pantera Press. Good Reading is a monthly magazine dedicated to books and reading and aims to help readers discover their next favourite book. You can find out more about the books discussed on today's podcast at goodreadingmagazine.com.au.
Hi and welcome to the Good Reading Podcast. Angus Dalton here with you. You just heard Markus Zusak reading from his latest book, Bridge of Clay, a suburban epic about 5 brothers, the Dunbars, who live with a dog, a cat, a mule, a pigeon, and a goldfish named after the king of men. He is the author of 6 novels, including The Messenger and The Book Thief, and he's joining me now to talk about Bridge of Clay. Hi Marcus, thanks for joining me.
Thanks Angus, good to be here.
So, carrying around this book after reading how much went into it, and the 13 years of elbow grease that you spent writing it, it feels like this sort of like mythical tome, like the book that almost broke Markus Zusak. What does it feel like looking at a finished copy of the book, even now 6 months after it was published?
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I think you've just got to be totally honest with these things. It's, it's kind of a beautiful thing too. Like they've done such a good job with it, and there's this kid on the roof on the cover that you brought in, and it's funny, when I first saw that, I thought, God, that's absolutely clay, but it's also me. And I think that's kind of what this book is. The bridge in the book is made of clay, of that character. It's everything he has in him, and I think this book is made of me. So I think I kind of compartmentalise, I think. I don't realise I do it, but it's almost like these things aren't happening. Like sometimes I have to remind myself that I did finish it and that it is out. And, and then you'll get people make their comments on the book and tell you what they thought of it, and you go, yeah, it is real. So it's, but it does feel mythical in a sense. I feel like all books do, because so often you just can't believe you're actually a writer. That it actually happened. So I've been living that mythical kind of life for the last 20 years now, I've realised.
I think the reason I'm using the word mythical as well is because how much, obviously, in many ways, it's like a suburban gritty story, but then also you've got so many sort of mythical allusions in there as well. Yeah.
Well, just how all of the animals, I mean, the mule's name is Achilles, the goldfish is Agamemnon, king of men, as you said. And although they don't call him the king of men, as every time they mention his name, usually they just complain about the fact that, couldn't it be a bit easier to pronounce? But I really like that idea that we start being who we are long before we're even born. And there are sort of like the stories that led to us even coming into existence, and all the coincidences. And then all of us have these stories, or so many of us have stories of, parents or grandparents or great-grandparents who made these great journeys to a certain place. And then we wind up with all of those stories kind of embedded into who we are. And so that was why the mythical element in the book of using Homer, so the Iliad and the Odyssey, that thread that runs through the book, it just gave it that gave me that feeling that we are making myths as we live. And there was just that. It started actually with the nicknames. All the characters had nicknames, and I went, oh, that's a bit like how Achilles is never just Achilles. He's always the fast-running Achilles. Odysseus is always the resourceful Odysseus, laughter-loving Aphrodite. And so as soon as I thought of the nickname for Penny Dunbar, who for me is the real heart of the book, the Dunbar boy's mother, as soon as I called her the mistake maker, I immediately, it's amazing how you do all this work, you do years and years and years of work, and then you have a moment where something just hits you. And I saw her practicing the piano in Eastern Europe with the drizzle or the snow coming down outside, and I saw her father, who's teaching her, calling her the mistake maker. And then I thought, oh, and she came from a watery wilderness. And that line is borrowed or stolen straight from Homer. And I thought, that's what this book is. It is a suburban epic, because we all think we live these dull, mundane lives, but we all fall in love, and we all have people die on us, and we all have big arguments in the kitchen, and we all do terrible things and heroic things, which might even be that time where you go up and talk to someone for the first time. I feel like I wanted to recognise those moments and build them into a life, and it's a life that's being built into a bridge, and so 13 years later, 14 years later, yeah, it is done, and it does have that mythological sort of feeling to it, I think.
It's funny that you mentioned the nicknames, because I was going to ask, because obviously we've got the Dunbar's mother, the mistake maker, and their father, the murderer, and their grandfather, the statue of Stalin. So it's funny that was already present in the book before you sort of started borrowing from Homer.
Yeah, I always feel like you sort of pinpoint where ideas come from, and then you go, am I telling the truth now? Was I just lying? And I try to always tell the absolute truth in, any time I'm being interviewed or in general, and that's like talking about your fears as well, and even to talk about, that person who came up to you and said, oh yeah, I read Bridge of Clay, not quite as good as the book Thief.
Oh no!
or worse than that. But that's being a writer. You've got to. One of the first rules of being a writer is that you have to be able to take rejection. You have to be able to take humiliations, and and people just feeling like they've got the right, and I guess they do have the right. I feel like we live in the age of opinions now too, where if you've gotten it's a little bit like we photograph everything now, and it's almost like you weren't there unless you took a photo of it. It didn't happen unless you took a photo of it.
Pixar, it didn't happen,
and,
absolutely.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, and sometimes like, you'll be standing outside, okay, let's go for an absolute cliche. You might be standing at the Leaning Tower of Pisa, let's say, and you'll be taking all these photos of it, and then you'll stop and you'll go, I think I should probably look at it. And you remind yourself to actually look at it. And I think maybe it's the same with opinions these days too, is you didn't really have an opinion unless you've told someone that opinion. And so I think all of this is one of the things with being a writer, is that it's the sort of job that's always challenging how much you really want it. How much do you really want to do it? What does it mean to you? And so, yeah, you get your criticisms, and that can be on, prime time, well, maybe not prime time television, but it might be on TV, or it might where someone's read your book and has either good or bad things to say. And sometimes your good feedback can be equally as challenging, because then you feel like you've got something to live up to. And that's often the case with the book Thief, as an example, where people, and it's the most beautiful thing in the world when someone comes up and says, oh, it's my favourite book, or I love that book. And that's what you're in it for, is you sit down to try to write someone's favourite book. And if you fall short of that, well, it's no disgrace, because there are a lot of great books in the world. But you're always questioning how much you really want to do it and why you want to do it. And I think the reason I love being a writer is I like the idea of waking up in the morning and being able to roll out of bed into the world of the book. And so I feel like I live in two worlds. There's the real world, and then there's that other world that I'm creating where I get to go in there and believe it while I'm there.
Yeah. When you were waking up and rolling into the world of the Dunbar household, what are the first things that you would see?
Well, the first thing I would do would probably start swearing. Although there isn't that. It's funny. They're not that bad. But I guess probably the detail I would say is probably just the breadcrumbs that are perennially around the toaster, and the coastline of dirty dishes reaching towards the sink. And that was a line very early in the book, a coastline of dishes stretching towards the sink, where you just go, oh, that's where I was actually just a kid again, playing in the sandpit, which I think you're always trying to get to as a writer. Is I feel like you do all this hard work, like I said before, where it's like you're climbing a mountain, but there's the promise of a sandpit at the top. And when you write an image that you like that, it doesn't have to be an image, it can be anything. But for me, often it's just a play on words or just an idea. Like, so that coastline of dirty dishes, I remember writing that and thinking, oh, that's I'm just playing there, you know. And they're the moments you live for. And so they'd be a few things. The other thing would be, I think, the mule hair that's on the carpet at some point. It's Henry comes back and he's deliberately gotten himself all beaten up to help Clay in a strange kind of way, and he blacks out he sort of ends up down on the carpet, and Matthew, as the narrator, looks down. He says, you know, he was lying there with the dog hair, cat hair, and Jesus, is that mule hair on the carpet? And so there was a sort of and that to me was part of the love of that household. It's it's a rough and tumble place, but and there are all these rules of love and engagement, that are at play, and it's a kind of complex system, but it's how they live, and I think there's a kind of, it's almost like there's kind of a river running under that house. And that's their bond, you know, and they reach into that when they really need it. And I think with those brothers, I never had this exact thought, but I think it's always easier to put into play later what you were trying to do. But I think it was more, I was just trying to write about boys and brothers, not only, I wanted to write about them both how they are and how we would like them to be. And when you have a mix of those two things, then they're not just cardboard cutouts, or they're not just, you know, delivering a good, you know, the right message. You know, you just want them to be real and to feel them as they are, but feel for them as well. And so now, you know, I think the last thing I could say about those boys is that I remember when the book was done, and this circles back, I think, to your first question. I remember when it was done, it was going to the printer, and my publisher rang me and she said, "Oh, how does it feel? You must be ecstatic." And I said, typically, I said, "Oh, I'm actually feeling kind of flat and a bit low." I said, "I don't really." I said, "I spent all the last more than a decade whinging about these people, and now I'm trying to figure out how the hell I'm going to live without them."
I read that Clay actually came to you as a character a long time ago, before you even started writing, when you were 20. How did that character walk into your head?
I think I was really an ambitious kid, always. I think because I'm the youngest of 4 kids, I might have been ambitious anyway, but I'd always seen my brother and sisters always doing things that were just out of reach. And I often joke that my brother and 2 sisters would go horse riding. This is once or twice a year, if that. And they would go and do that with my dad, and I would have to sit in the car with my mum and wait. And maybe at some point I thought, one day I'm going to show you bastards. Although I don't remember having that exact thought, but I always had this sort of ambition in me to want to do something. And so I had this idea when I was 20, walking around the suburb where I grew up, and I just thought of a boy building a bridge and wanting it to be this one beautiful, great thing. And why it was a bridge, I don't know, but I think maybe I just had an affinity for bridges. And I think, you grow up in a city like Sydney where there is water everywhere and you've got this iconic bridge and so on. And I just had this idea. And then it's funny, every book needs just a little bit of luck to come into being or to start becoming a book. And in that case, it was the name of the character. I called him Clayton. And I thought, Clayton's Bridge. I thought, that's the title. And then a few months went by and I went, Bridge of Clay. And as soon as I had that thought, I thought, clay, there's clay the name and then clay the material. And the idea that clay can be moulded into anything, but it needs fire to set it. And I instantly saw where the book was heading and what the ending should be. And of course, it doesn't end like that, because every book in that way too, pretty much every book I've written has always been leading to this one thing, and it always ends up veering left or right of it, or coming up shorter than that moment, or going a bit further. And so I had this idea of a boy wanting to walk across the top of the water when the bridge floods, and the sun would be coming up in the water, or the reflection of the sunrise would be in the water, and that would be the fire. And of course, that's not exactly what happens at the end of Bridge of Clay. And so that was, it was just always having that ambitious character, and sort of manifested itself in a boy building a bridge. And that's how then the other mythical element of the book came in, which was Michelangelo and the statue of David, and how in Florence you go to the Accademia Gallery and the statue of David is like a prince under this dome of light that's been seemingly built especially for him. And leading into it, there are these unfinished sculptures of his called the slaves, or the prisoners, and they're still fighting and almost like kicking and screaming to get out of the marble, and so I thought, that's the perfect juxtaposition. I don't really like to use that word for some reason, but it was just
very English teacher.
Yeah, that's right. It's sort of now I'm trying to go through all those other words that you should use in your Year 12 essays, and but yeah, it was the perfect contrast, for want of a better word, and of just where Clay is trying to reach that. He's trying to reach something like the David, but he still feels like the slaves. And what I found was, and personally, I actually now prefer the slaves to the David, because that's how we actually live.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of the slaves before.
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating thing to do. Is if you ever go to that museum or gallery, you just go and sit there and watch people, and everyone just almost disregards those statues, and they go straight to the winner.
Yeah.
They go straight to David, and they'll be lucky if they come back and see those ones. And there's something beautiful about that as well, and certainly something beautiful about the people who do notice those those in transition sculptures that will never transcend from where they are now. And I think the line in Bridge of Clay is that they've been fighting for centuries to get out of that marble, and they will fight for a few centuries more.
Yeah. I read that both of your parents migrated to Australia from Europe. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like the way that sort of stories about their experiences in Europe and some of the conflict that happened there, and how those stories sort of unfolded in random ways throughout your childhood, was kind of formative. Is that right to say? Yeah,
I think I was also... So the thing I left out about being the youngest of 4 kids is that I was also spoilt. But the way I was spoilt was that I got to spend the most amount of time with my mum and dad at a period of time that was useful, rather than having their attention when I was 0 to 3 years old, or even later than that. So when I was in my early teenage years, that was when my sisters had moved out. My brother was more sort of out with friends and doing things like that. And so I got to sort of go on long bushwalks with my dad. I'd go to work with my mum some nights, like she cleaned a doctor's surgery, and I'd work with her, and I'd just ask the same stories all the time. I'd say, can you tell me this story? Can you tell me that story? And it would just be, it wasn't a set thing. I mean, some years it might have only been a couple of times, but it's why I say to parents and teachers I say, don't be afraid to tell the same story more than once, because people want to hit that point in the story, and kids especially, they want to hear it again and know if they're right, or know they want to hear that punchline. And so it did make me kind of aware, not only that they were telling me about their lives, but I think later on then I realised that I think they were just giving me a love of stories, and I think it's reflected in Clay, in Bridge of Clay, where he's the one who goes and does the dishes with his mum and dad, and says, "Oh, can you tell me about the statue of Stalin?" Or "Can you tell me about Moon and the snake?" Moon being his dad's red cattle dog that had a tussle with a king brown snake, and they both died, and they were buried in the backyard in this old town, which is important to the book as well. And so I think it was just this idea that what we're made of really is stories. And you take stories out of our lives, and there's actually, I mean, there are physical elements, obviously, and all sorts of information, and granted, but I think stories are what tell us who we are. And I think hearing my mum and dad's story have made me one of the lucky ones to recognise that.
You always seem to talk about books and stories with a particular kind of reverence, which is so cool. And you can also see that in the way that books appear in Bridge of Clay and your other books as well, and how they're passed between different characters and they come down family lines and that sort of thing. Where do you think you got that reverence of books from?
Well, I think it's just purely because books have changed my life. And that feeling of, you're 14 years old, you've got to read books for school, and you're given The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, and it's the right book at the right time, and your brother's snoring on the other side of the room, being generally useless, as usual, and you're staying up late reading, and you're there. And I think because to me, it's one of the ultimate magic acts of, you're reading a novel, it's made up, it's totally fiction, but you believe it when you're in it. And I thought, that's what I want to do with my life. And then you're just given, you just have these moments when you're reading a book. And I feel like, and I do love films as well, and always have, and they get mentioned in Bridge of Clay as well. But it's almost like, when I always feel like maybe the difference, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to articulate it now, is that when you're watching it on screen, it's given to you and you're seeing it. But when you're producing that by reading a book, it's like you're in it. It's like you're there. And I think that's where the reverence comes from, is that the most alive I've felt is, there are many ways that you have that in your life, but one of those for me has always been reading, and coming alive in a book is one of those really magical things.
I have a story that you just reminded me of. It's very quick. Mm-hmm. I was on a trip with some friends down the coast.
You should just go on and on like I do.
No, not at all.
Sorry, go on.
And so I went on a trip with friends down the coast, and it was just one of those weeks where the sun shines every single day. It was just idyllic. We'd go to the beach, come back, be all, drenched in salt, and we'd all spread out on the balcony and read our books for hours. It was completely paradise. It was perfect. And I had my best friend Emma in front of me, and she was looking down at her book, and I was sort of reading mine, and I came out of my reading reverie for a second and looked over at her, and I could just see a sliver of her face because she was looking down at the book. And there was just something wrong. I couldn't tell what it was, but something was just niggling me. And I was sort of looking at her, and she sort of sensed me watching her, and then she turned and looked up at me, and her eyes had blown up. They were swollen, and her face was beetroot red, and there were tears pouring out of her eyes, and her breathing was all wrong. And I was like, holy shit, my friend's having an anaphylactic
oh my
shock.
God.
But she just finished The Book Thief, actually.
Right.
That was her malady. And that just reminded me, and I just remember watching that and being like, I cannot believe, and of course I've experienced that too, but watching it happen to another person. And also she finished Bridge of Clay the other day and said that she had a similarly visceral reaction many times while reading it. And just how little black lines on a page can evoke that sort of reaction is extraordinary.
It is, and that's so generous of you to tell that story. Thank you. And it is that funny thing when someone comes up to me and says, "Yeah, thanks a lot. You made me cry on public transport," and I'll say, and I've still never seen anyone reading any of my books in public.
You've never spotted someone?
I've never. The closest I've come was on a plane, and my wife said to me, "That lady over there is reading your book." And and the writer in me wants to tell the story like this: that when I looked over, she was asleep, but she wasn't. She had put it down though, so it didn't count. So clearly, it is a put downable book. But it's just I hear these kinds of stories, and you think, God, it's just amazing, and it's an honor and a privilege too that someone, I think in this day and age too, where we're all told that no one wants to go to the effort to concentrate anymore and so on. And in that case too, I mean, Bridge of Clay does make certainly more demands of the reader than The Book Thief did. But that people are still willing to go to that length, they will be rewarded, and I'm not just talking about in The Book Thief or Bridge of Clay or whatever, but books are sometimes there to test you, and sometimes they are there to give you that kind of visceral reaction that you're talking about, and I kind of love that, and I love that when I'm finishing Bridge of Clay on a hot, humid sort of day in Sydney in the afternoon, you have this idea in your mind that you're going to finish it as the sun's coming up in the morning, the critics are all in bed, that this book was never going to give it to me like that. It was always going to be harder or more interesting or not the expected thing. And it was just 3 or 4 in the afternoon and finishing that book. And I was just, I think it really hit me why Matthew, the eldest Dunbar boy, was the one to tell the story, because I think I realised how much I had become Matthew in the writing of it, and just how much he's telling this story, realising and understanding how much he loves his brother and how much he wants him to come home. And that was how I felt finishing it. And I still get a bit emotional thinking about that now. And just having little surprises like Rory, the really rough brother, sort of saying when he's talking about Rosie, the border collie, he said, I felt like she was just hanging on, waiting for Clay to come home. And he's the one who's always whinging and moaning about all the animals in the house. So it's just the little things. And you spend so much time in the writing of a book, and people are investing so much of themselves in the reading of a book, and I love that. Books are tougher. I love that books ask something of people still, and because everything I feel like we do live, maybe more than ever, we sort of are all going, it's all about me. It's all about me, and books allow us to say, it's actually not about me at all. It's about this and them, and let's see what it's like for other people for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned before about how Matthew ended up being the narrator of Bridge of Clay, and I read that you did some experimentation through a couple of different narrators and narration styles and stuff like that. And that made me wonder, through the whole process of writing it, what was the mainstay of the book that was always going to be in it from the very beginning to the end of that 13-year period?
That's a really good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before either. And I think there were a couple of mainstays. One was, I every now and again I kind of joke that people would say, if you're having so much trouble with this book, just write one of your other ideas. And I'd say, well, that's the thing. I haven't got any other ideas. But I think what I realise now is that every idea I was having was going into this book. This book was everything. And it was, you finish The Book Thief, what do? People would say, just write something small and fun or whatever. I went, no, I want to bet everything. And I think that mentality of betting everything and saying, let's put everything on the line again. Let's do it. Let's make this either crash and burn or be equally as ambitious as The Book Thief. And and if not, hopefully more ambitious. So I think that mentality was the real mainstay. There was a real determination there. And I think the other thing was just Clay himself as a character. And, I really loved that kid, and I loved what he was about. And I kind of liked the idea that you had to spend this whole book getting to know who he is. And, and that's where you do get people who say, I feel like, I think some people, they do just want a book where this happens and this happens and this happens, and you know everything straight away. You know in the first 50 pages what you're going to get. You know what's already happened. And so I like the idea that in books, it's one of the few places now where we don't have to know everything straight away. You'll be given a little bit, and we spend this whole book getting to know the character of Clay. And I think it's both him and Penelope were the mainstays of this book, and working with those words was what kind of kept me going. And the amount of times and I did have to quit the book twice. My wife made me quit once, and she's the real unheralded hero of this book, because she made me stop. And it's the old cliche that you don't know what you've got until it's taken away from you. And after about 6 weeks, I was ready. And then I found we went away and read through it. It was amazing just to, I can read the book in a day and a half, really, or 2 days. And we just read it to sort of go, is this alive or is it dead? And I remember coming away from that weekend thinking, God, I've actually done. See, and this is the thing, you often feel like such a failure as a writer because you didn't get that done that day, you didn't get that done that year. And then you look at all the work, like we're sitting here at this huge table. If we put all the work that I'd done on this book across the 13 years on this table, it's sort of, I guess it looks about 5 metres by 2 metres.
It is an enormous table,
and so
people can picture.
And just the amount of work, it would so easily just go all the way up to the ceiling and probably more. And so then when we went away for that weekend, I thought, God, I've actually done 97% of the work. I've written 90% of the book. It's just, you just got to go in, get your hands dirty, don't be too precious, and just get it done now. And then it's interesting that you can spend, well, in this case, a decade working on a book, and then you can write the last 50 or 60 pages in a month. And but you can do that because you've got all treatments written and you've got it all mapped out and you've done little pieces of writing. I remember it's funny sitting here talking about it, but I remember there was one, I was on the 19th of December, I was going to deliver Bridge of Clay at the end of 2016. I had the last part still to write, but I'd already written it before, but it was going to feature in the middle of the book. But so I had these chapters written, I had treatments written for other things, I had ideas out, and I just went, right, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm delivering the book at 9 o'clock, and I just sat there and I just furiously typed. I'd be sort of going bang, 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 15 minutes, chapter done. 15 minutes, another chapter done. And it was totally incomprehensible. and I didn't deliver that. I delivered the first, so it's 8 parts. I delivered the first 7 parts and I left it, but it was there. And the big thing was there was the most important chapter where we see what happened in Clay's past that has made him like he is now. And I couldn't get any emotion out of that chapter anytime I wrote it. It's like sometimes we have a problem with, it can be anything. It can be trying to hang a door or trying to get that pic, and you're missing something. Oh, what am I missing? There's something that I'm not doing here. And that night or that morning, when I was furiously typing, I looked at that chapter and I went, what is it? I just went, you don't have time. Just write. Just go. Just take what you've got and use it and write. And then it struck me. I went, that's it. That's it. And it was just one little thing where he called his mum the mistake maker and referred to her nickname. And it just made me understand why there was no emotion, is because it didn't bring any of it. of the backstory into it. And that's where often your connections are being made. Think of the end of Gallipoli as an example, where at the beginning you've got Archie Hamilton's his uncle saying, "What are your legs? Steel springs. Well, what are they going to? How fast are you? As fast as a leopard." And then you get to the end, and he's in the trenches, and he says to himself, "What are your legs?" And that's when you just start. Especially the first time you see that movie, you start bawling, and it's because you know the history of the characters, and the history of the character has just come into the present, and that's where the emotion is, and that's why when you're reading and you've read that moment, you feel like you're there.
Yeah. Hearing you talk about the your writing process there, and also how you always try and be sort of straight down the barrel when talking about writing. It made me remember that in the past how you describe yourself as more like a tradesperson, and quite often I hear authors talk about themselves as like magicians who are like tapping into this cosmic place of creativity, and then the characters just fall on the page and they just watch what happens. But I love that you're just like, no, it's like bricklaying, there's no alchemy here. I love that description.
Yeah, I often feel like I feel like a tradesman who is trying to create an artwork, and I think that's the thing is, and then you're reminded day after day, yeah, but you're not an artist. You're not an artist. You're a tradesman. So but the only hope you've got is to do that work, and it's not like you're trying to fool the reader or fool yourself, but you're just trying to touch something that is just that little bit out of reach, and I love that idea too. That it's interesting too when I hear writers talk about how they dream about their characters, and the characters do all the work, and that's great. And I love that they can, but I just say, when someone asks me about that, I say, no, I just really work on my characters. They are work, and that's why I love them. There isn't anything too whimsical about it. It's just they become real because I've chipped away the bits that don't feel real, and I've had to add pieces. Like in Bridge of Clay, really good example is that one of the most pivotal chapters in the book is the first past chapter in part 5. So it's called Growing Up the Dunbar Way, and where we see that family for the first time as they were before any of the bad things happened. And it was always a bit wooden. It was always a bit... And it's because I realised, looking back, talk about, I'm doing something wrong here. What is it? It was at that point when I was writing, I thought, this book's getting too big. So I was trying to clip things off it all the time. And it was when I went back in to say, get your hands dirty, I went, it's fine. You've actually got to bring these characters back to life. And that was where I made the chapter longer, but there was more life in it. And and it's funny how 8 pages of reading can be torture, but 12 pages of reading in a chapter can be really beautiful. And it just needs to be as long as it needs to be. And in that case, that was just, I actually needed to insert anecdotes and things rather than chip them away. So it's figuring out what the problem is. Is there too much or is there too little? And you only understand those things by being with the book and getting to know the book. And that's what people say to me, how do you get better at writing? Like, I say, you've just got to spend time with the book. You've got to spend time with it and know it, and feel like, so if you said to me, just don't test me on this, you can if you want, but if you said, there's that part where this happens, and it wouldn't take me more than 30 seconds to find that page, because I know that book so well. I know the world of that book so well, and so I should.
Yeah. Well, it's like you're an author and not a sculptor, because I imagine it's a lot harder to re-add marble to a sculptor rather than edit in another anecdote.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I just glue on something here.
Marcus, talking about this book, you talk about how at the core of it, the elevator pitch is that it's a book about how we're all made of stories. So what's one of the stories or some of the stories that make Markus Zusak?
It's funny you said the elevator pitch. I had a classic moment. I was in London, and it was with Bridge of Clay, and I was in a bookstore, and sometimes I get you to sign their stock or whatever. And it was Hatchard's, which is this iconic old bookstore. And I got into the lift at the top, and there was a security guard there, and he said, "So what's your book about?" I said, "This is literally the elevator pitch of Bridge of Clay." And so that was just a classic moment. But, okay, the story, probably one of my favourite stories that makes me who I am and the writer that I am, is that I might have been 9 years old or 8 years old, and I did athletics. And I remember running in a race, 100 metres, and I remember thinking that I'd won, and I got put in 6th position. And I remember going and crying and carrying on to my dad and saying, "I thought I won," and they put me in 6th spot. And he said, "It looked like I thought you won as well." And he said, "But you made one big mistake. You didn't win by enough. You have to win by so much that they can't take it off you." And in terms of writing now, I don't think of trying to be better than anyone or you're trying to be the greatest writer, but I try to write so much only like myself that no one else could have written that. And I know that no one else could have written Bridge of Clay. I know that no one else could have written The Book Thief, no matter what anyone thinks of those books. But that's what I'm aiming for. I'm trying to write so much like myself that it could only have been me that wrote that book. And that's one of the pieces of advice that I'll give people who say they want to be a writer. So what should I do? I say, just try to write exactly like yourself. And I mean, the other main piece of advice I give people is just take it easy on yourself sometimes too. Like often I feel like such a failure, or I feel lazy, or I feel like I'm not really working hard. But I think those feelings are only there because you want to do well. It's a bit like nerves before something, is that they're only there because you want to do well. But you'll know when the time comes that you have to sit down and say, now, this is it. I've been cultivating the iron will for this moment. And that's when you sit down and write and don't stop. And then if you're lucky, you'll actually finish something, even if it takes 13 years.
I love that. There's nothing like some fatherly advice.
Yeah.
That's good advice for life as well. Just be as you as possible.
Yeah. And also if you do want to do something well, go beyond. Go beyond a little bit, and that at least gives you the greatest shot that you can possibly have.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much for your time, Marcus. It's
Angus,
been
such a
absolutely
pleasure.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Good Reading Podcast. Bridge of Clay is out now from Picador, and Markus Zusak is a guest at this year's Sydney Writers' Festival, which runs from the 29th of April to the 5th of May. You can find more info in the description to this podcast. Bye!